Thank you for that great discussion with Sherman Barnes there. And he's definitely right about things being so tight that it's kind of difficult to take on new customers right now if you're a logistics company.
And part about the capacity for drivers, I mean, not a lot of people talk about that. We always hear talks about the driver shortage and not a lot about the driver retention, which is a huge thing within the industry.
Absolutely. So talk to us a little bit about what's going on if you're a shipper right now, Carl.
Definitely. So when I look at the economy, because I'm an economist, so I have to look at the shipper update in the economic view.
Of course.
I like to shift it into two different segments, upstream and downstream. And so when we're looking at something like the ISM PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index, which is, of course, a survey that's sent out. So it's not actually tangible data, but it has tangible implications, which we'll get into a little bit later. Anything above 50 is indicative of expansion, while anything below 50 is indicative of contraction, specifically within the manufacturing segment. And so what we see here is that there was a reading of 60.7 for the ISM PMI in the latest report. And so this is showing that there is some substantial expansion within manufacturing. We also have our blue line right here, which is going to be our flatbed outbound tender rejection, which is tangible data that shows the capacity for flatbed trailers, the equipment types that usually haul these goods. And we see that it's moving in coordinates with each other. So we're seeing tightening capacity for those flatbed trailers as that manufacturing activity picks up and ramps up throughout the country.
Let's talk a little bit about prices when it comes to those flatbed trailers, because as we all know, it is so tough to source any type of capacity at all. Are drivers being paid are they being paid premiums? Are shippers having to pay these premiums to these drivers to get their freight moved?
Definitely. So on our next chart, we're going to see a little bit of that there. Prices are absolutely insane, and no one's talking about it. It's one of the things I'm very skeptical about, and I like to really hone in on it. But what we have here is the manufacturing prices, part of the ISM index. And so we see that prices are now at an 89.6. So if you remember, anything above 50 being expansion, 89.6 is pretty extreme, and it's only, I think, less than 1 percentage point away from a historic high that we've seen well over a decade ago. So we are nearing historic highs for pricing. And so what we're seeing in times of cyclical recessions in the economy, manufacturers and upstream producers usually take on those price increases to help not increase those obligations for those consumers. So maybe they can't take those hits on those price increases, retain some of that stuff, and so some of that market share, I should say. But now that we're seeing more of the economy opening back up, that's going to really kind of make it difficult for these manufacturers to continue to take on those price increases. The other thing that's really impacting these price increases, of course, commodity shortages. We're seeing it with semiconductors. Lumber's been a big one in the headlines. It's really across the board still, anything and everything, in a really big shortage.
So when it comes to talking about shortages, of course, we brought up the whole Colonial Pipeline issue that's going on, and we are not quite seeing the implications from shortages yet, other than maybe people starting to panic buy a little bit ahead of that. Can you tell me a little bit about where you think prices are going to go, reflecting those changes and maybe those fuel shortages that are coming for drivers?
Definitely, I think those prices are only going to get more amplified, especially upstream. We're looking at manufacturers. I mean, this is something that's very new, and I think you just hit the nail on the head. There's going to be some panic buying for sure. We saw that even at every single level, at the smallest level downstream with toilet paper last year. So it's only the thing that's likely going to happen as you see more people buying and buying. With prices upstream, this is going to have direct implications for those downstream prices when we're looking at those retail segments. So with shortages for things like semiconductors, we're going to see those shortages lead into maybe fewer trucks or slower truck orders being fulfilled. And so with less trucks on the road, with an already capacity crunch, that's going to increase prices not only for those drivers, for those manufacturers, and eventually for those final consumer.
And so we're looking going forward, and those hits haven't quite taken effect yet. Use your future predicting powers. When do you think that we're going to see those downstream effects come into play?
Definitely. So I think when we're starting to see some of those downstream effects are going to come into play, I would say within the next 2 months of data releases. So what we've seen right now have been reports on imports prices. They're starting to increase. And so I think once we kind of see some of those increases come in on different segments, it's only going to be a matter of time until we start to see more widespread price increases downstream. The other thing is that we have employment numbers coming out, some of them a little bit lacking. If you look at some of the reports, like the Census Bureau's unemployment rate, which kind of ticked back up 1.1 percentage point, a tenth of a percentage point, not a huge deal. But as more consumers begin to return back to the workplace, that's going to create more confidence. That confidence is going to create more consumption. And that consumption is going to be really stretched thin because the US is expanding at a much rapid rate compared to some of our trading counterparts who are maybe still struggling with COVID. Vaccine efforts aren't as prevalent there, and so they are not going to be able to produce as a rapid rate as the wonderful country of the United States can consume. So we're going to be consuming at a faster rate than other countries can produce. That's going to put upward pressure on consumer goods as well.
And so you mentioned the whole headlines around lumber prices, and that's still something that we're continuing to talk about. Give us a quick little update on new home starts and how those are reflected.
New home sales starts are through the roof. We are seeing that they are now at record highs-ish, since levels not seen since 2006, I should say, across the board, except for the West Coast, which there's a mass exodus there, of course, to the west, from the west to the south and Midwest. So we are seeing a mass exodus there.